Welcome to Mighty Finsights. I'm Rory Holland, and
Thanks
I'm
for
joined
having
by
me,
my
man.
friend Allan Rayson. So good to see you.
Sitting here in Austin, Texas.
Yeah, the sun's coming in. Beautiful
Yeah.
day. Springtime in Austin. Allan is the founder and CEO at Finov8r. And Finov8r, I'm just going to read a little bit about what your website has to say.
Sure.
So Finov8r bridges finance and technology to deliver revenue and enterprise value for banks, fintechs, and corporates. With executive leadership and company building experience, Finov8r acts as an embedded advisor, offering C-suite level expertise and delivering revenue strategies, enabling using fintech and innovation.
Love this.
Wow.
I must have some good PR people.
You do. You must.
That's
you must.
great writing.
So you're based in Austin.
Yep.
And how long have you been here?
I have been in Austin since 2013.
Okay.
So call it 12, 13 years maybe.
Yeah.
So this is, we were talking earlier, but this is my, I guess what would be my 12th or 13th South by Southwest.
Yeah. You've been around.
I have. That makes me a little older.
But where were you born? Like, where's home originally for you?
Oh man. That's a tough question for me to answer. I grew up in a military family. So I was born in Tulsa, Oklahoma, at St. Francis Hospital. I'm a 76er. I'm of the 76 vintage. But when I think I was like 11 or 12, my mom entered the military. So she joined the Navy. And at that point, we were all over the place. So we lived in Japan for a while, Okinawa, kind of that part of the world. Lived on the East Coast of the U.S., in North Carolina for quite a while. Spent a lot of time in the New York, Connecticut area. So people ask me where I'm from, and I'm like, man, I don't know.
Yeah. You're like, I don't know.
I live in Austin now, and I hope to never leave. So I guess I'm from Austin.
You got some roots.
Yeah.
Here now. You've been here a long
here.
time.
Yep.
What would you say, thinking about your childhood and all the different experiences you had living in different places, was there anything particular that like shaped you when you think about like who you are today based on your experience?
Yep. Man, when you grow, like it's admittedly a challenging upbringing as a kid, because it's, at least in the Navy, I don't know about other branches, but we were on 36-month rotations. Or my mom was on a 36-month rotation. I was along for the ride. But that means we're moving somewhere new, and you're in a new environment, whether you like it or not, every 36 months. So that could be, that could be fourth grade, could be seventh grade, could be, 10th grade. For me, like our rotation came up at the end of my junior year. I was fortunate to get an allowance to stay at Camp Lejeune for my senior year. But when you're sort of growing up like that and you're forced into a new situation, it kind of is what you make of it. So you get really good at adapting to whatever, kind of whatever situation you're in. Sports was always my way to plug in at my new school and kind of get integrated and plugged into that new environment as quickly as I can. But man, fast forward to today as an adult, like the ability to adapt, especially with the chaos that we're living through right now. Being able to adapt, I think is a good trait.
Yeah. I talk to my kids about resilience, and I think for those of us that, I talked a little bit off camera previously, just, childhood stuff, and we all have our stories, right?
Yeah.
But I feel like for those of us that maybe had some challenging childhood times, whether it's moving around a lot or whatever it may be, and I teach my kids this too, because certainly I'm not perfect and I've made mistakes. And
you're pretty close.
God, I wish my wife was here. She wouldn't
it's on video and audio,
you, so it doesn't matter. But yeah, the resiliency factor and then being adaptable, and that's a great segue, because I wanted to dive into Finov8r.
Yeah, let's do it.
The name, dude. Like,
thank you, man. I appreciate it.
It reminds me of a company I had called ID8.
Love
just needs to drop an 8 or R on the end. I love it. And it seems like, from what I know about you and what I've read about, if I just take my knowledge and relationship with you out of it, Finov8r just is a fit. It seems like it's such a great fit for you for a time in your career with all
Yeah.
the experience you have. So I wanted to just ask, like, can you give us like a elevator pitch? Like
Yeah.
what service you offer, what products, like what's some of the core benefits that
Of
you
course.
generate?
Yep. So Finov8r is sort of the intersection of finance, tech, and innovation. That's sort of where it all came from. I have spent, as you well know, I've spent probably the better part of the last 20, 25 years building banks and fintechs. So in several cases, kind of from scratch. And most recently was part of a team that, kind of back to 2019, 2020, we went out and acquired a bank charter, stripped that bank down and rebuilt it to a little over 4 billion in assets fairly quickly in a little over 48 months. That's a pretty good run from an asset growth perspective. And I've done similar things. I've been fortunate to do similar things like out in the fintech space as well. On the payments, really on the like B2B, B2C payments side of the space. So I have been doing things like that for a long time. Love it. Like love this space, love this industry. And now building a advisory and consulting practice kind of in that same ecosystem of primarily banks, fintechs, and privately held corporates.
In what ways are you helping? Like, what are some examples of ways that you help your clients?
I'm generally always tied to a revenue project. So, I tend to stay in the 1 to 10 billion in asset space as far as the banks are concerned. Those guys, it's a great business model, but generally in that size bank has one primary source of revenue tied to a net interest margin business, i.e. lending. So I'll come in working on a couple of engagements right at the moment with banks in that asset size. I'll come in, help them optimize that existing revenue stream, and ideally build some new ones. Build some alternative revenue streams for them as well. So that could be fee business, could be interchange business, could be a whole host of things.
Yeah. So you're introducing likely, I guess, different technologies, different opportunities for revenue.
Yep.
So when you think about like the tools in your tool belt, maybe so to speak, where you've got all these relationships in the industry. So it sounds to me like you're kind of giving back a little bit now through consulting to others because you've learned so much over the decades.
I hope so.
Accurate?
Trying to monetize
Seems
that, but
like
I'm trying to give back
a living
as well.
doing that. Yeah. Well, you do it for fun, I know.
Yeah.
But actually, reminds me of a question I want to ask you. Like, what inspired you to do this? Like, you could have done so many different things.
Yeah.
Because you could have gone to work for a bank, you could have gone to work for a fintech, you could have done a variety of other things, but you chose to start Finov8r. Why?
Man, it's crazy because I have the same conversation with my wife a lot. She's like, "You could go back to corporate so easy and crush it," and I'm like, I mean, maybe at some point, you never shy away from opportunity, but for me, being inside of a bank for so long and now being outside of a bank, I'm of the opinion and of the belief that like I can make a bigger impact being outside of a bank, especially in a consulting or advisory capacity. Can make a bigger impact being outside of a bank than inside of one at this point, with years and years of experience and sort of operator experience, builder experience, executive experience, all the things. So that's kind of my why, in all honesty, is trying to build a business, not shy about that. But at the same time, I can make a bigger impact being outside of a bank.
I think I understand that conceptually, but maybe for the sake of the folks listening, I know there's corporate policies and bureaucracy and processes and maybe a lack of momentum sometimes towards some of those things that you want to do.
Yep.
Is it because you feel like as being an outsider, you have more leverage, or because you're not part of the system necessarily?
Yeah, I think it's a function of, I think it's partially a function of the fact that banks tend to have a relatively similar set of challenges that they're trying to solve. And I also think it's a function of, for so long the industry has been focused on just asset growth. Like we never had to worry about how are we going to fund asset growth. I just remember growing up in the business. I mean, I got promoted, I got comped, my career evolved based on my ability to grow assets. And I always, in the back of my mind, I'm like, I wonder how we fund these loans. But I'm like, well, I don't really care. I'm sure they're going to get funded somehow. Somebody else is handling that. And sure enough, the industry kind of rocked along pretty well until here recently, the last 2 or 3 years. So I think it's that as well. I think there's a bit of a, not to be crude about it, but I think there's a little bit of a skill set or talent gap in our industry with regard to the ability to build the liability side of the balance sheet alongside, driving asset growth. It's a bit of an art as we've all experienced the last 2 or 3 years. So that's kind of what makes me different. Having been and worked inside of banks, outside of banks, in the fintech space, in the corporate space, and also having like a really solid understanding of what drives profitability through this community bank business model and small regional business model. So that's kind of my why and what makes me a little bit different.
Yeah, that's interesting because you have such a different perspective, and then you have the freedom to bring that perspective,
Yeah.
not inside of a company where you might have different personalities, different leadership styles. But if you're a hired gun, so to speak, and I would say that's kind of similar in some ways to like when I started Customer, being able to bring my knowledge holistically of the industry and how it works and all the complexity and how to market a brand, build a brand, reach audiences, build pipelines, convert customers, retain customers, all that sort of thing.
Yep.
We often get hired to come in and address a problem or a potential opportunity, and because they can't do it themselves, or maybe they could, but they don't really have the capacity or the tool set or whatever to do it, or expertise. So I could totally see that. So how does, particularly in this evolving market like fintech, like this word that we use here, like it rolls right off the tongue for us, right? Most people are like, what is that?
Yeah.
For our world, for our sake though, and thinking about all of the value you can bring to a client and helping them understand what the options are, and then they've got to not only get on board with it, but they got to integrate it, get it implemented, and launch it.
Yeah.
Like, tell me a little bit. I don't know if there's stories that you have or examples so far.
Yeah, my sweet spot in the space is, and my skill set, candidly, is, kind of sitting in the middle of finance and tech. That's sort of where I've built my career, over the last 25 years, and have kind of top to bottom exposure, for this business model. And we're talking about community banks, having a finance and tech background, makes me pretty unique. But man, like tech and fintech is a tool. It's an enabler. It's not the end all be all. The banks especially really, the banks are great lenders and risk managers. They are not necessarily, they aren't great about, building a roadmap around a certain business model or monetizing technology, either to create efficiencies and strip OpEx out of the P&L, or, create new revenue streams. That's not really their strength. They're great lenders and great risk managers. So they often need people, kind of like myself, to come alongside them and help identify where can we build a new revenue stream. Probably going to use some tech, probably going to use some fintech, probably going to build some infrastructure. but like putting those puzzle pieces together is kind of how I generally explain it.
Yeah, I can imagine the challenges that they're facing now. My concern is community banks staying relevant,
Yeah.
and how can we, as kind of folks in this industry that all have complementary skill sets like yours to mine, and a lot of other people downstairs, the dozens of people downstairs, help community banks find a better footing.
Yeah.
And so for this next generation, because the wealth transfer is coming.
Yeah.
You and I have talked about that, and like, what does that mean? And what does that mean for community banks more than ever? New revenue streams, better efficiency, but also more value to the market they offer. And in some ways, are you helping them unpack some of that and like look at opportunities that they might not see for themselves?
Yeah. I mean, let's be honest, like, you know, there's 4,200 banks in the country right now. You know, when I started in this business in early 2001, or even like dating back to financial crisis 08, 09, I mean, there was twice as many banks at that point. So we're definitely on a path towards, you know, consolidation, and we have been for years and years. That ain't going to stop. My expectation is we're probably going to land, you know, in the 2,000 banks when we're talking about this 10 years from now versus 4,000 banks. So, you know, there's no stopping the consolidation and change that's, you know, that's going on in this space. But for those, you know, for those 2,000 banks, whether it's Austin, Texas, or, you know, Raleigh, North Carolina, or, you know, these like major metropolitan markets and even community markets, I mean, these are mission critical aspects of these communities, you know, to be able to put capital into the hands of small businesses and mid-sized businesses in these communities. I mean, that drives everything. Like that drives that business's growth. It also drives employment in those areas. You know, the trickle down is pretty remarkable. So we need those 2,000 banks that are gonna be a part of this to your point, be as relevant and strong as possible.
Yeah, because what is
profitable as possible.
What does the future look like when you don't have community banks? I don't know.
Yeah.
But I think we're starting to see it because it is changing so much.
Yeah. I mean, if you look at the growth of the private credit markets, not that they're really participating down market like that, but you know, there's alternative sources of everything these days, whether it's, you know, product or capital, that are slowly kind of eroding what banks do in general.
Yeah.
But man, these community banks are just a mission critical component of, in my view, they're a mission critical component of life in Austin, Texas, or, you know, even places that are much smaller than this.
I agree. And I guess that's what, you know, growing up with several thousand more banks than exist today, and then watching them dwindle and or, you know, get acquired and merge. I don't know what the future holds, but it seems to me like the kind of work you're doing can help them remain more relevant, be more competitive.
Yeah.
My hope is they learn how to do that, and they follow guidance, and then they learn how to market better.
Yeah.
To compete.
Well, they need you at that last mile
I'm trying
marketing perspective.
I'm trying. You know, we definitely have conversations with community banks, and we want to help more. We've helped several.
Yeah.
And we work with some today.
Yeah.
But I haven't found that as many leaders of those banks are as intentional or concerned.
Yeah.
As I am. Maybe in some of those conversations.
And that's the other dynamic that exists in this space is you've got, you know, you've got a segment of the community bank space, especially that really wants to evolve and grow and innovate. But then you've got another segment that's, you know, that bank is like a family business of sorts, and it's profitable and it serves its purpose, and you know, they're not gonna rock the boat. But you know, the market's changing. It you know, it's all of us are gonna have to evolve
that goes for me and
community
you
banks
too.
or otherwise. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think they don't want their boat's going to get rocked one way or the other, and it is getting rocked. I think sometimes gently, sometimes not.
Yeah.
But then when you think about the types of customers that you want to work with that aligns well with you, what is that? What kind of attributes do you look for, or criteria? You mentioned the 1 billion to 10 billion, but more personal kind of things like chemistry, values, like are those things?
Yeah. You know, I'm working with several banks right now. One of which is out in West Texas and Lubbock, Texas, specifically, where I've personally spent a lot of time. So, you know, banks like that, where you know where they're meaningful and growing parts of a community like Lubbock, I'm all in on that. You know, especially where they want to evolve their business model to be more of a resource to a small or mid-sized business. I tend to, you ask about, you know, kind of common traits. I tend to stay in that 1 to 10 space. I tend to work with banks and I would say fintechs as well that are commercially oriented. I don't engage on too much like consumer or retail oriented stuff. It's mostly commercially oriented, and those that want to grow, those that want to evolve their technology and evolve their business model, and ultimately thrive from a profitability perspective as a result. Like, that's who I want to be working with.
Where do you see the biggest opportunity for Finov8r first, and then second for the market you serve, for the community banks?
Yeah, great question. The biggest opportunity is really coming back to a place where we're paying as much attention to asset growth as we are to the liability side of the balance sheet, and building the deposit franchise the right way with the best economics. To be able to do that, you've got to do some fairly unique things, and you've got to be tuned in. You've got to be tuned in from a technology perspective. So, I think while the last 2 or 3 years have admittedly been a pretty big shock to the system for all of us, there's going to be a lot of opportunity in that, because now we are actually building better organizations that better banks that have better economics from a deposit franchise perspective, leaning into what we already do well in the space, which is lend money. Like, the industry is going to be a lot stronger as a result of some pain and misery that we've all experienced in the last 2 or 3 years.
Sounds like a lot how we grow as humans.
It seems like it, right?
It's funny that.
Why does it have to be like?
Why does it be so hard?
Why do we have to get punched in the face to learn?
I don't know, man. I'm one of
It could be
those.
easier, but that's just what it is. Yeah.
I take a couple of shots to the face. And, yeah. So wanted to kind of take a step back, and you've been in the finance industry a long time, and like, how did you find yourself in finance? Like, did you intentionally go into finance, or did it find you? Did someone introduce you to it? Like, how did that?
Man, good question. If I'm being honest, like, I needed a freaking job out of graduate school. And at that time, this was pre 9/11. This was the end of 2000. I'm coming out of graduate school. The dot-com bust hadn't quite happened yet. The banks were hiring. Comerica, in my case, that's where I started my career as an analyst, which I had no idea what that meant. I'm like, man, you're going to pay me $42,000 a year to train me and give me, like, let me spend the next 2 years like training to be an analyst and eventually a banker with you. That sounds fantastic.
Sign up for that, right?
Yeah. I'm sitting here as a broke graduate student seeing the opportunity to make $42,000 a year in Dallas, Texas. I'm like, yeah, Give me that.
That was
I'm all
good.
in
That
on
was
that.
good back
I'll
then.
figure the rest out,
Yeah.
later. And admittedly, like, at that time there wasn't a lot going on in the industry. It was, there wasn't innovation. We hadn't quite made the digital, the digital transition wasn't on anybody's radar at the time. But, now fast forward, it's game on. This whole industry is changing. The markets are changing, how we deliver banking product and services and who we deliver it to from a, small and mid-sized business owner perspective. It's been quite a journey. And then I would also share, especially for the younger, for the younger audience, I took a lot of risk along the way as well. I mean, I just remember looking back, banking is a great career. You can have a life, you can build a family. At times I went against the grain and left like pretty high paying jobs to go pursue a startup in the fintech space, and took a second mortgage out of my home at that time to have the startup capital to be able to do that. Like, my kids were still in diapers at that, in those days, and I had a mortgage and a wife and, kids in diapers. So, like, looking back, I'm not sure I would do it all over again that way, but taking some risk to learn, I think is what I look back on, I guess most favorably or most fondly. I would do that again. I would take some risk to learn. That's fun to me, but also, has made me more relevant, I think, kind of fast forward to today. I mean, there's just not a lot of people that have finance, banking backgrounds along with the tech and innovation background as well. So it's been a lot of fun, but not without a lot of risk.
Yeah, there's so much value in when you leverage something like your home. I've done that too. To start a company.
Yeah.
It's all on you.
Yep.
And it takes a lot of commitment to do that.
Yeah.
And you got to believe in yourself. And I think sometimes, when I was talking with that you met Alex McLeod.
Yeah.
Earlier, and it was just really neat to talk with her just about the mindset of founders of companies and the challenges we go through, the self-doubt that we have. I know I share that, and having good people on your side, which is going to lead me to my next question. Good people on your side that can help you keep your eyes focused in the right direction, remember who you are, what you're capable of. And we're all capable so much more than we think we are.
Yeah.
Sometimes we need people to remind us of that, particularly in the early days of when you leverage your house to
Yeah.
So question I want to ask you is, who along your journey has been a key influence, and what did they teach you?
Yeah, I mean, there's been handfuls. I feel like certain people, as I look back, certain people have sort of come into my life for a period of time. Sometimes it's a short period of time, sometimes it's a long period of time, but for me, sort of back to, I guess, how I grew up and just being able to adapt to whatever's in front of me or whatever situation I'm in. That's what I lean into as well, but also, being able to lean into people that I trust that have kind of maybe blazed the trail before me. Or have skill sets that are not the same as mine, and maybe see the world a little bit differently, and kind of being open to that, like being open to, whether it's an old banker, mentor, or, honestly, my uncle that used to be way up the food chain at Deloitte, and kind of people in between over the years, just being like honest with myself, I guess, to know that, man, I don't know it all. Like I know what I know. I know what my journey's been like. I do not know it all. And I need the voice and the, perspective of those around me to ultimately help me, build what I'm trying to, or get over a hurdle or whatever, whatever it may be.
Yeah, I imagine your community has grown so much over the years. I know we know a
I've
lot
been
of the same
super
people,
fortunate.
and
Yeah. Yeah.
it helps a ton to have a community.
Yeah.
It's hard to do it on your. We really can't do it on our own.
No, never.
I think there's this misconception. I know with some of the younger people, I can only speak for my kids and then some of their friends that they see the success of these folks on Instagram or TikTok or whatever it may be, and they're like they've just always been there. I'm like, no, there's a story. There's a story somewhere from childhood to that.
Yep.
And I'm sure they're not, when they say they're self-made, that's not a true statement.
Yeah.
Because you can't do it by yourself. You just can't.
Never.
So the power of community, I think, is great. And I think the Fintech House is a great example of what
Fantastic.
what Alloy Labs has put together here.
Yep, I agree.
So what's on the horizon for Finov8r this year? Like any exciting projects or goals or anything you want to share?
Yeah. I only do, I'm not a high volume guy. I only did, I think 6 or 7 engagements last year and in all of 2024. That's about my sweet spot. 'Cause I'm solo, I hope it's always that way. Build infrastructure around me, but, it's just me and that, and that work. I tend to keep it pretty contained, but pretty deep dive with respect to the engagements that I work on. But for this year, so I guess where I'm going with that is, I'm only scalable, as you well know, in the professional services, consulting, advisory business. I'm only scalable to a point, unless I want to go work 100 hours a week, which I don't. So for me, that is taking me to a place where I'm about to launch a paid subscription component to my business, kind of coming alongside the advisory business. So, paid subscription and paid content for me is me delivering 25 years worth of experience to bank executives, fintech founders, privately held corporates, in the form of content that they can read and listen to and watch video of. So like I literally will ask a subscriber, I want you to tell me what are your top 2 priorities for the second quarter of 2025. I'll take that on. I'll return, content and insight that will help them, meet those challenges or meet those opportunities. I'll then come alongside that subscriber with 4 or 5 hours worth of advisory. And so that could be either like we have a specific objective we're trying to get done in those, in those 5 hours, or, that could be a subscriber. Hey, we've read what you wrote for us. We've listened to what you put on audio for us. We want to use those advisory hours to deepen what we heard from you, or what we learned, because we want to go incorporate that into our business tomorrow. So like that's sort of the future for me, is to continue to do, 6 or 7 pretty deep dive, meaningful engagements in 2025, but also bring, a paid subscription component to the, to the world as well. Try to make a bigger impact.
I love that. That allows you to spread some of that impact that you can make to more people.
So. Yep.
Yeah, I love that. You and I talked about that. I think it's as professional services, it's hard to replicate ourselves. We can do it to a degree for sure.
Yeah. I also think this is a little bit off topic, but be curious to your thoughts. I mean, for what we do in the advisory space, we're constantly writing and we're constantly building SOPs and documentation and white papers and resources on behalf of our clients and in general, we pretty much live on Zoom, or at least I do. So where I'm going with that, like the opportunity that we have to let LLMs work on our behalf, that's something that's also on my mind in the context of the advisory business, is like building an agent that is sort of my proxy, and allowing that agent to ingest all the things that I've personally written and built over the years, ingest hours and hours and hours worth of Zoom calls for what those are worth. And like, AI specifically is going to play a big role in our space, on the consulting side, just like it is in banks and other places. So that's a priority for me as well this year, which should be interesting.
I want to see you pull that off, because I think it's so great that AI can give us that ability. I certainly have, I'm exploring it.
Yeah.
Primarily because it's fairly common to have a conversation like on Zoom, for example, since I spend my days on Zoom too. And I don't necessarily feel like I might be giving someone much value in the half hour, like an intro call, but then I often hear, boy, this has been really great. I'm like, well, I didn't really do anything. Like, yeah, but you helped me answer these questions. I had never thought about it that way, or I just didn't know the answers to them. So I'm thinking about that too. Again, back to my heart in that is just to help more people, because I know more people being successful will just make the world a better place. So how can we do that more? And I think LLM's a great way to look at it. So I would definitely like to explore that with you more.
Yeah.
All right. So one last question. Where do you see, this is a big, wide question. Where do you see the industry, fintech industry, heading from here? Like the next 3 to 5 years, with all the nuts stuff that's going on around between AI and the Fed and all this other thing.
3 to 5 years, man. It's hard to look a week
3 to 5 days.
It's hard to look 3 to 5 days in front of us. Man, I see, fintech, speaking of getting punched in the face, I mean, fintech has experienced, it's been a rocky ride, over the last 2 or 3 years, especially as there's, less capital, less venture, less resource coming into that space. I think we're to a point where, we're on stable ground. There's enough venture that's active, still in the fintech space to, for it to continue to be a viable part of what we do. I think the fintechs are, and in the context, when I refer to in my world, fintech is product that's coming through a bank channel primarily. Fintech that's selling their product to a bank, or otherwise has like huge reliance on a bank from an infrastructure or balance sheet perspective. The fintechs are really figuring out what's important to the banks and helping the banks create the balance sheet impact, and or the P&L impact that they want to be able to realize. Fintechs are learning more and becoming more in tune with, okay, we've got a great product, we're best in the world at what we do from a technology and software development perspective. They're gaining ground in their understanding as to what produces a great impact for a bank from a balance sheet or P&L impact, and in turn, what creates a great impact for a small or mid-sized business owner. So like that's the future. I'm kidding about the 3 to 5 days, but over the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years, banks and fintechs are really going to be more in tune than they have ever been with respect to those outcomes that the banks want to produce.
Great insight, man. Allan Rayson, Finov8r.
So fun, man. Thank you for doing this.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Good to have you on.
Right in our backyard in Austin, Texas. I appreciate it, man.
That's right. We'll have to do it again.
Love it.
Thanks, buddy.
Thank you for listening to this episode. If you've enjoyed what you've heard, don't forget to hit subscribe. And if you'd like to learn more about Customer and the work we're doing building financial and fintech brands and businesses, please visit our website, customer.com. That's CSTMR.com. Or you can find us interacting with clients and sharing insights on LinkedIn. All of these links will be in the show notes.